So I joined eBay sometime in early 2006, and at that point in time, there weren't that many people who were actually buying online in India. So I had started my career in eBay on the supply side of the business. I used to be director of category management. As director of category management, I think I learned a few things which I always stand by, which is that if you have great products and a differentiated offering, customers will always come and buy from you. And I think that was the underlying thought behind setting up Pepperfry. That was the underlying thought behind wanting to be an entrepreneur, provide differentiated products to customers. And that's where I think the entire thought sparked off. The other thing at eBay that happened, and I think was uniquely eBay India, was that we, in the 5 years that I was at eBay, I think we spent most of our time trying to throw the eBay global playbook out of the window. And the reason why we did that was that Indian customers are different, the way they buy is different, the level of maturity of the market is different. So we built a lot of product features, we built a lot of our business processes specifically tailored to the Indian consumer. For example, let me give you an example. We had a escrow type payment service, which is called PaisaPay. And the only place in the world that it existed was actually in India. And with things like these, we had localized our business heavily. We had made our business specifically catering to Indian requirements. And I figured that required me, as eventually the CEO of eBay India, to have a fairly entrepreneurial mindset. And I thought that, look, if I have that and if I can leverage it to build my own business, let me try doing that. And that's where I think it all started. I was the country head. I was the CEO for the last 3 years of my tenure at eBay. So starting about 2008, early 2008 is when I taken over. And from 2008 to 2011, mid of 2011, I was the country head of eBay India. So I guess a little of this, one will have to rewind right back to the beginning of my life. I come from a very middle class family. My father died young. My mother was a government servant, a scientist, and therefore I have, I guess, I got lucky in terms of the career choices I made, the kind of education I got, and to me, frankly, the thought of building a legacy is far more important than making money. And in my mind, therefore, monetary stability has never contributed towards any of the decisions that I've taken. And I think, therefore, I really didn't think twice about leaving a successful corporate career and becoming an entrepreneur. Because I was clear why I wanted to do it. And that was towards building a legacy, a company that people would know for years and decades and years and millennia, hopefully, rather than just worry about short-term monetary stability. Every plan you start off with will change. That's the first learning. The second is that there is no substitute for having absolutely the right guys working with you in a partnership. And you just can't buy that kind of thing. And I've been really fortunate to have like an awesome co-founder like Ashish along with me. That's the second learning. And the third is that especially in the initial years of a startup, I guess you should dismiss the idea of having a work-life balance. I think broadly, there are a few waves in e-commerce. And the way it works is the first wave in e-commerce tends to be the wave of electronics and fairly standard products. So you have people buying mobile phones, digital cameras, books, DVDs, CDs, etc. online. And that's followed very often by a wave which is the fashion wave, wherein people buy brands of fashion. They know what those brands stand for in the real world, and therefore when they're buying them online, they have a fair degree of comfort on the kind of products that they will be getting. And the third wave of e-commerce tends to be even more non-standard products, which are products such as the products that Pepperfry sells, which is furniture and home. Now, if you look at the more developed part of the world, right, it took about 15 years for these three waves to materialize. And in India, these three waves happened in the span of 5 years. And today we know that customers buy a lot of home and furniture products online and so on. So that's the evolution of the shopping behavior. Now, what that results in is a whole bunch of things related to the demographics of the customer change. So you have, so if you ask somebody who constitutes e-commerce 3 years back, they would have typically said men. So it was men who were buying shoes, men who were buying athletic sports gear, men who were buying the electronics, men who were buying the mobile phones. Today, I think, and especially true for Pepperfry, it's all about the independent Indian woman. And women have become a large chunk of the overall buying segment in e-commerce. So that's an underlying demographic shift that's happened. The other shift is earlier e-commerce was supposed to be the bastion of the metros. That's moving down town class at a very rapid rate. So you have a large chunk of business for all players, including us, coming from tier 2, 3 towns across India. Just to give an idea, since we started, we would have shipped furniture products in India to more than 1,000 cities. So it's those are underlying stages of the fundamental waves of e-commerce, how the customer is evolving, how their purchase behavior is evolving, how the demographics of the customer is changing. And everything's changing in the favor of, let's say, a more digital method of transacting, a more digital method of doing commerce. So here's things that they will have to think about. They need not be wary about, but they have to think closely about it. They'll have to build device agnostic businesses. So if you built a business which was, the best possible web-based or laptop-based business in e-commerce, and then suddenly the mobile revolution hit you, and you couldn't adapt your business to mobile, then you were in trouble. So you have to build a business which is built on core strengths, and it should be device agnostic, or be able to focus on all kinds of devices that customers interact with you with. So that's one thing that I think all entrepreneurs need to be careful. The second is, there is this thing that happens whenever penetrations of particular media increase substantially in a particular, let's say, location or a geographical area. They come with their own opportunities in the form of highly local businesses which suddenly begin to thrive, and local businesses thrive on deep penetration amongst small catchment areas. So growth in a time when, let's say, the internet penetrations are going up, etc., is going to happen to all businesses, including local businesses. The thing that entrepreneurs need to think about is how will they scale that growth? How will they react to scale? So it's fine when you get let's say, your first 10 crores of sale. It's also fine when you get your first 50. But how do you get from 50 to 1,000? I think is what entrepreneurs need to think about, even as they are setting up their business. So that thought towards scale is something that I would think all entrepreneurs need to consider. And the third is, you should be clear what your philosophy on hiring is. And I mean with this more as a philosophy rather than a skills and competencies of who you're going to hire and stuff like that. It's what's your hiring philosophy. For example, at Pepperfry, our philosophy is the following. We do not believe that there are any experts in e-commerce in India. And therefore, what we look for is learning agility. So if you've done 2 different things or 3 different things across a career, which could be as little as a year or as much as 10 years, but if you've shown that you were able to adapt from one situation to the other, then Pepperfry is going to come after you and really want to hire you. So I think you got to get your hiring philosophy right. Those are 3 things that I think entrepreneurs need to think about at the get-go. So in our case, it's simple. We are in a industry segment where the top 5 brands contribute to less than 4% of overall sale. Right? So what that means is that if you look at the top 5 brands of home and furniture products in India and include retail brands in them, the overall share of consumption is like 4%. That means that 96% of the market, or let's say a large component of the market, is fragmented and it has no established brands. Now, when you are in a market which has no established brands, the onus of providing quality and a standardized experience actually falls on the marketplace. And which is why we are a managed marketplace. So this is how we manage our marketplace. We ensure that the way the listings come up on our website are absolutely standardized. So what the customer sees is what the customer gets. We ensure that all packaging is standardized. We ensure that fulfillment is handled by us. We ensure that quality checks are done prior to items getting shipped to the end consumer. And we do all of this in order to provide a great customer experience. And that's how we manage our marketplace. And remember, our customers are both the sellers and the buyers. So we provide customer support to buyers and we provide merchant support to our sellers at all points in time. So we manage the marketplace to ensure that we thrive in a highly fragmented, non-standardized category where the preponderance of brands is not that high. And which is where, fortunately, we have the ability to make margins because those are also inherently a nature of the business. But we have to put in the effort to manage the marketplace right. So here's how, and let me also start at the origin of Pepperfry. So when you're starting, I talked about 3 waves in e-commerce, right? So the wave of electronics, the wave of fashion, and the wave of home and furniture. The wave of home and furniture had just begun to happen in the rest of the world also. So we figured that that's an opportunity for us to provide or to build a business on a consumer need which is just emerging, right? However, being entrepreneurs and let's say in order to hedge our bets, we decided to also have an element of fashion products in our business. So we did a little bit of fashion, we did a little bit of jewelry and so on. Now, after 1 year of doing that, and as a business, we grew substantially and phenomenally. Here's what we sat back and thought. We said, what's the market segment that we are addressing? And is it large enough? And we realized that about 50% of our business used to come from home and furniture products. The market in itself was like a $20 billion market, 20 to 30, depending on who you read and who you believe. So it was a very large market. And it was a market where a managed marketplace model, which fundamentally does not run on inventory, the model works perfectly, right? As opposed to, take fashion. Fashion is, because of the various size requirements, etc., fundamentally an inventory-based model. It's a model where we as marketplace guys really would not thrive. And it was an area which while the market in itself is very large, frankly, neither I or Ashish really enjoyed selling fashion products. And at some point in time as an entrepreneur, you need to be, so do you really enjoy selling the products that you sell? And both of us are home buddies and, homebodies, and we enjoy selling furniture and home products. So we sat back, we realized that we're going after a really, really large market segment. We realized that the unit economics of the market segment is awesome, especially if we focus on home and furniture. We realized that we'd already built a differentiated business with investments in supply chain, which helped us cater to the segment. And therefore, we decided to focus. So overnight, not overnight, I mean, this thing took about 2 months to prepare. And then on the 1st of April 2013, we actually gave up 40% of our business. And it was crazy at that time. You just cut down 40% of your business. But in less than 9 months from then, we actually made it all back twice over. And I think it was the best call we ever took. So the positive factor is what I talked about, right? The negative factors are the following. When you are in a segment such as fashion, you have to do stuff which is based on inventory. Our comfort with inventory has never been high. You are in a segment where essentially it's a few brands which drive a lot of sale. So therefore the marketing spends, even from a search and so on standpoint, tends to be focused on those keywords. Therefore the cost of marketing is high. The levels of discounting that segment was operating on was also very high. So overall the unit economics of the segment didn't work. So here you had home and furniture, which had an average order value of 3,000 rupees. And then you had fashion, which had an average order value of 400 rupees. And so therefore, even from an average order value standpoint, the shipping costs were not getting borne, the contribution margins weren't there, and so on. And we also realized that the degree of differentiation that a business would be able to build would inherently depend on the brands that they were selling. While in home and furniture, the degree of differentiation that we were able to build is inherently by virtue of the fragmented supply that we get on board. And that's a far higher differentiation in our mind, and therefore we decided to focus on it. So we set up Studio Pepperfries for growth, not for, so, okay, so the way you ought to think about this perhaps is, customers' buying decisions are driven by utility function. So it's a function of how much utility a customer gets from various components of your marketing mix. So your brand or your brand advertising and your brand positioning derives a certain sense of, brings a certain amount of utility to the customer. The kind of value that you deliver to the customer, which is the prices at which you sell products, etc., delivers another amount of utility to the customer. And then whether the customer has actually seen your products in upfront and so on, delivers another bunch of utility to the customer. And then variety of the products that you offer delivers another bunch of utility. If the sum of these 4 utility functions crosses the threshold of buying, a customer buys. Now, because there are various customer demographics out there, the amount of utility that customers get from each of these 4 factors tends to vary. So some customers are heavily about brand and the brands of products that they buy. Some customers are a lot about value, and some customers are a lot about the variety that they seek. What we realized was we were not fulfilling the requirements of the touch and feel customer, the customer who derived utility from actual touch and feel of products that you're selling. And therefore, Studio Pepperfry helped us start that journey of providing utility and therefore crossing the purchase threshold for customers who derive a lot of utility from the touch and feel experience. And that's the reason that Studio Pepperfries exist. We knew that most customers in India do not buy products that they touch and feel in the home and furniture space any which ways. The normal buying experience in India is that you get to see 10 products, then you want to see more, and typically the shopkeeper is going to show you a catalog and say, I can make this for you. So we know that that's the case. We've done enough market working for us to know that that's the case, and that's how it happens. And we realized that we don't need to solve for it because customers are relatively comfortable. What customers would seek more is, especially when they're making higher value purchases, is for them to commit a large amount of money, they need to touch and feel the product. In order to commit a larger amount of money, they need to be able to have a conversation with somebody. And that conversation is what we aid through Studio Pepperfry. So I think on a bunch of criteria. And it starts with the listing. If you want to list, let's say, a mobile phone, and it's a Samsung mobile phone, you go to the Samsung site, get the image from the Samsung site, you get the attributes from the Samsung site, you'll get the review from TechCrunch, and your listing is done. When it comes to listing a coffee table, odds are the first time that coffee table's image would have appeared on the internet would actually be on pepperfry.com. So therefore, the process of listing is you got to organize for the shoots to happen, you got to get the attributes of the products developed from scratch, you got to write the content which is relevant to customers on those particular products, and then only does the listing go live. So at that stage itself, there is a significant difference between the two business models. And then it goes further. In the case of horizontals, you have the quality assurance is provided by the brands of products that they sell. So if I were buying a Nikon digital camera or an Adidas t-shirt and so on, the quality is assured by Adidas or by Nikon. In the case of a marketplace such as ours, on a category such as ours, where there are no large brands, and we are essentially about bringing products from craftsmen and small carpenters and small businesses online, the quality assurance has to be that of the site. So therefore, we need to make significant investments in the way we ensure that standard quality is followed across the board, right? So that's the second point of difference. And then the third point of difference, I think, is just a supply chain. I think horizontals have built great supply chains, but a typical horizontal supply chain is a guy on a bike carrying a bag. Now, a guy on a bike carrying a bag can carry most products, but he'll find it a little tough carrying a bed or a dining table or even a coffee table. And we are specialists in being able to deliver these large items to consumers across India. So I think these three fundamental reasons, our business is very differentiated from horizontals. So we work with small businesses and with craftsmen. Now, these guys are awesome at making the products that they make. They are the best in the business when it comes to making the products. However, they're not necessarily very tech savvy. And the processes that they have tend not to be very standardized or very operationally intensive, so to speak. So, what do we do well? We help them get online and sell their products to buyers across India and the world. We help them do that really well. They are the ones who make the products really well. We help them sell really well. In helping them sell really well on a marketplace, they require standardization. So, for example, if you were a customer and you were buying, let's say, a bedside table and a bed for your bedroom, and both of them were being bought by you in something called teak finish. But one merchant's interpretation of teak finish is different from, say, another merchant's interpretation of teak finish. What you as a customer might be saddled with is a bedside table and a bed in your bedroom, both of which look a little different from each other. So therefore, that degree of standardization across our small and medium business merchant base is what we bring to the table. We ensure that colors are standard. We ensure that the hardwares, etc., that used are of the same high quality across the board. We ensure that the wood is, seasoned to perfection and stuff like that, without actually telling them what to do, because they are better at it than we are. We just ensure that the offerings that we provide in the marketplace are what buyers look for in a standardized quality that buyers look for. So that I think is our secret sauce. We've got this right really well. The other piece we've got right is how do we get goods across thousands of kilometers in India at relatively low costs to a consumer sitting far away. So if you take, for example, a small place like Churu in Rajasthan, where some of our manufacturing happens, and there are sellers there who sell to buyers in Bangalore, right? How do you get a product from Churu to Bangalore in under 600 rupees, a product for furniture? That's again our secret sauce. So it involves transshipments, it involves moving goods in large containers from one city to another, and then it involves a last mile delivery component to the end consumer in Bangalore. And in case there is assembly requirement for a particular product, providing that assembly to ensure that products are fitted perfectly in line with what the customer wants within a certain amount of time, is again our secret sauce. So it's the sourcing supply chain and the supply chain of getting the products right down to the end consumer. So the first thing is your customer experience is just as good as the experience that the person who interacts finally with the customer gives to the customer, right? So therefore, tons of training goes into that entire process. Tons of verification goes into that entire process, because at the end, the person's carrying a brand into a customer's house. So the training involves things like early morning grooming sessions. So if you were to go to, let's say, our infrastructure hub in Bhiwandi, in the morning at about 7:30 in the morning, you'd find about 300 people there, and everybody would be doing yoga. And it's a morning ritual for about an hour. They do yoga. Everybody's checked for grooming. If, for example, you've not shaved the day before or that day, then odds are you might be asked to not go to make customer deliveries that day. The so to speak kit that they wear, the t-shirts and so on, are provided by Pepperfry, laundered every single day. So it's that level of detail that you need to get into, because that's the impression that you make on the customer. And then eventually it's how good are you when you're placing the product inside the customer's house? Are you taking care to ensure that the space that you're placing, let's say a wardrobe in, is actually clean behind the wardrobe? So, doing that. Are you ensuring that once the wardrobe is placed inside, you've checked it, you've asked the customer to check it for all elements, that the customer is totally satisfied with it? Do you ensure that you get the feedback from the customer right there and then? All of those steps are things that we train people for, because it's a very important responsibility when you're going into a customer's house. It's interesting. So not only do we have a business in a market segment which is fragmented, does not have established brands, we also do it with hardly any inventory with us. So we don't own the inventory. So we are able to check the products only when the products come into our warehouse. And therefore, we have feet on street, people who are, let's say, itinerant quality checkers, who go around to supplier locations to keep checking whether the seller is making products as per that specification which was ordered by the buyer or not. We have folks in merchandising who are specialists in capturing visuals of products in situ at the seller's location, instead of needing to get it into a studio type location where you shoot the products. So a lot of our processes are tailored around the fact that we do not have the product with us in inventory. So we came up with it finally on a trip from Pune to Bombay on the expressway. And here's how it came about. Ashish and I always wanted to form a company which is based on 3 values. The first value was Indian, the second was honest, and the third was fun. And we were doing a lot of brainstorming, and we figured, look, pepper is something that India has been famous for ages. It's the reason why, so to speak, the West discovered us and so on. And therefore, pepper is a truly Indian connotation. It's a very honest spice. Every Indian, everybody knows the smell, taste of pepper, and it doesn't confuse you. It's a very simple, honest spice. The thing is, it's boring, and therefore a third value, fun, kicked in. And the fun with pepper only happens when you fry it. They say in Hindi, tadka lagana. So it's when that happens that there's fun in it, and therefore pepper fry came about. So that's the origin of the name Pepper Fry. Love the name. Wouldn't have chosen anything else. So various parts of it, right? So you can use it to define how you communicate with customers. You can use it to define what kinds of product fulfill what kind of customers' needs, and therefore give directed, relevant information to customers as might be relevant. Even more important, you can actually use it as the backbone of your supply chain. So if you were to come on to, let's say, Pepper Fry, right, and you were to want to buy a piece of furniture, here's what you do. We ask you to enter a PIN code. And the reason why we ask you to enter the PIN code is basically because basis that PIN code that you entered, we can tell you from the supplier's location, from the seller's location to the buyer's location, how many days will it take the seller to ship the item, and how many days will it take in transit to reach the buyer. And we provide this for each PIN code for each SKU that exists on pepperfry.com. And that's basically its data which is mined from a central database repository when you enter the PIN code. So I think making relevant consumer communication, directing communication to, again, that relevant customer, figuring out the backbone of your supply chain, using it to actually define the way you make your customer promises and then live up to them. Data mining and analytics has tons of applications. I mean, I can think of 10 more, and they would all work for the business. The most important thing in Pepperfry's culture is intensity. We try and get stuff done in half the time and half the cost, putting twice as much effort as, I guess, normally organizations would do. So I think intensity is like the defining part of Pepperfry's culture. It reflects in the kind of passionate conversations people have on the areas that they manage. It reflects in the kind of passion that people believe in the brand with, uh, and that's actually the defining part of our culture. How do we hire for it? So very interestingly, in positions that I take interviews, and I keep suggesting this to people, and we've started doing it on a regular basis. Uh, there's a part of your CV which, frankly, not many people care about, which is what are your extracurriculars? And in Pepperfry, a lot of time gets spent on discussing your extracurriculars when you're in an interview. And the reason why that happens is because if you're truly a passionate individual and you put down an extracurricular there, then you will chase that extracurricular activity with passion. And that's, for me, is often a very good judge of, do you truly believe in things? Are you an intense personality? Is passion something that drives you? So that segment of a CV, which most people don't really talk about, Pepperfry talks a lot about. Lots. I guess interviews I would normally take would not last more than 10-15 minutes. I would normally have read the CV earlier, seen what the person's done, and then 10-15 minutes in an individual, you tend to get a clear idea. Then there is the other one where you know nothing about the person's job, and it's all about judging whether the person's the right fit for you, and you can actually aid in the customer in the person's career development cycle. And that's what happened whenever that's what happens whenever I hire for technology jobs. I'm not a technology guy. So one of the jokes that I always tell is I got my CTO drunk over beer, and that's why I convinced him to join us. So the original business plan that we'd built for the business um had us hitting like a $35 million type run rate at the end of 2015. Uh, as you guys might have an idea, what we are finally doing is way beyond that. So anything that we thought we would do, actually we've only been pleasantly surprised by what the business could have done. So in my point of view, I think when you're building out a plan on an Excel sheet, you're always way more conservative than what consumers really might do for you as a business. You just have to believe. 300-400% growth on an Excel sheet is a very optimistic person can actually put that in place. Chemistry. I need to know that the people will like the business that they're investing in, and we will like working with them. I think that chemistry is really important. The second aspect, I think, and we are big believers in funds, investors, companies who have operational knowledge of running businesses, and because we think that helps. Not no entrepreneur, actually nobody can answer all questions at all points in time, and therefore having people around the table who are used to having handled such situations earlier helps. So I think those are two things that we really consider. The third would be pedigree. Uh, have investors in the past, have those investors stood by companies when times haven't been always rosy? And I think that kind of orientation is something that I guess all entrepreneurs should look for, because you never know. I mean, you'll have ups and you'll have downs in a business, so you need people around the table who are with you both times. I would look for the team. Yeah, I think it's uh, what have you done, which is, say, any experience that exists in the team. The second is how well have you thought through the market that you wish to address. Uh, for me, for example, a simple, well-crafted deck is a representation of how clear the strategic thinking of a particular team is. Uh, and therefore, those are two things that I really would look at. Uh, and the third is, have you thought of scenarios which are like plans B and C, right, to your plan A? And you don't need to project them, you don't need to build business models around them, but have you thought of those scenarios when you're looking to build a plan A business? I think those three things are the things I would look at. So I would say, firstly, if you're looking to be an entrepreneur, cut down on overheads. So if you drive a large car, get a smaller one. Live in a large house, stay in a smaller one. So cut down on overheads. The savings, etc., don't matter, because frankly, money has a habit of coming to people who do good work, right? Just cut down on overheads. Second is, if you're going it alone, get a partner who, so get a person who is your best friend and you can say anything to, and try and convince that person to become your partner in the business. And I think that'd be a great move. The third would be, build a business, the money will come. Don't go after waves and in terms of what's hot right now and so on. Build a good business. Build the fundamentals of your business well. The money will come. I guess be prepared for things not happening as per plan. So I think the thing about learning agility is that people who have or inherently are learning agile look to reskill themselves on an ongoing basis. And it's just inherent to that attitude of learning agility, right? So yeah, whenever there's something new in marketing, people who are learning agile look to learn what's new. When there's something new that's happening in supply chain, people who are learning agile will look to learn from what's happening in supply chain. And I think that's inherent. They could do it on the job, they could do it through structured programs, but it's inherent to individuals. And I think learning agility, especially in fast moving, constantly changing, dynamic environments, is all that a person can really do. So that tomorrow there'll be a totally different thing that might happen, and you can adapt to it if you're learning agile. You can perhaps even interpret it earlier if you're learning agile, and those are a few things that really make you successful. Very often it's very tough to balance the time requirements that offline education has with other things that a person might be doing, which is either work or any other academic course, etc. So I think online education has a definite role to play. I'm myself a fan of certain online education portals, and I've learned a lot, especially in areas where I wanted to get a perspective on and had never had the opportunity to look at those areas in detail, and which might have nothing to do with my job or the work that I was doing. But for example, I'm an archaeology buff, and I've taken courses in archaeology and anthropology of online forums, which I thought were awesome. No, so you have to be mobile friendly, you have to be web friendly, and look, my only advice would be, listen to your customer, figure out a method of listening to your customer on an ongoing basis. And if you do a good job of that, you will know what's going to happen. If I really knew what would be the trend 3 years from now, odds are I would either be adapting my business already to it, which I might be doing, or I would be building a completely new business to fulfill that trend. So I think the only answer is continue to listen to your customer, and you will get to know what all trends are there.